Jack Rios had always been a mechanic, but not the kind you'd find in a shiny, well-lit garage with state-of-the-art tools. No, his shop was small, tucked in a forgotten corner of the city, far from the bustling streets and high-rises. The windows were dusty, the walls lined with worn-out tools, and the faint smell of grease and metal hung in the air. Jack didn't mind. He liked it this way, quiet, simple, and just the right amount of messy. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The shop barely stayed open most days. People in the city didn't need car repairs as much anymore. With most of the population now relying on hoverboards and electric bikes, mechanics like Jack found themselves struggling to keep up. He spent his days fixing broken bikes, patching up damaged parts, and sometimes just cleaning up the old ones people brought in. Jack wasn't rich. He didn't care to be. All he needed was his tools and a place to call his own. One rainy afternoon, when the city was quiet and most of the shops were closed, a customer came in that Jack never expected. She wasn't like anyone he had ever seen before. The woman who walked through his door was no taller than 5 feet, with skin that shimmered in hues of purple and silver. Her eyes glowed softly, and her hair, which was more like shimmering strands of light, moved as though it had a mind of its own. She wasn't wearing the clothes Jack was used to seeing, no jeans or jackets, but something far more unusual. The fabric looked like it could change color depending on the light. "Excuse me," she said, her voice light, almost musical. "I need help with my bike." Jack, who had seen all sorts of broken bikes in his time, glanced up from the workbench. He was used to people who needed help but had no money to pay for it. It was the story of his life. But this woman, this girl, was different. There was something about her that seemed otherworldly. "Sure," Jack said, wiping his hands on a rag and walking over. "What's the problem?" She motioned to a bike leaning against the wall. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen before. It hovered a few inches off the ground, and its wheels were more like glowing discs. The frame was sleek and silver, with patterns that seemed to shift as if they were alive. "It's broken," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not moving the way it should." Jack took a look at the bike. At first glance, it didn't seem that bad, just a few dents in the frame and some damage to the energy coils. He could fix it, no doubt about that. The only thing that struck him as odd was the strange symbols on the bike's surface, symbols he didn't recognize. "Where'd you get this?" Jack asked, trying to hide his curiosity. "From home," she replied, her voice becoming quieter, as if she wasn't sure how much to say. "It's important. It's the only one of its kind." Jack didn't press her further. He had learned long ago not to ask too many questions. People came to him with problems, not stories. And he did his best to fix what was broken. Still, there was something about this girl, something in the way she spoke, the way she looked at him, that made Jack feel like he was in the presence of something far bigger than his little workshop. "All right," Jack said, rolling up his sleeves. "I'll see what I can do. No charge." The girl looked up at him, a mix of confusion and surprise on her face. "But you haven't fixed it yet," she said. Jack chuckled. "Doesn't matter. I'll fix it. No charge. It's just a bike." "You're sure?" she asked, still not understanding. "Yeah," Jack said, setting to work. "You just sit tight. I'll have it running in no time." As Jack worked, the girl sat in the corner, watching him closely. She didn't seem to mind the old, dusty workshop, or the mess of tools scattered around. She was so still, almost as if she was waiting for something or someone. Jack didn't mind the silence. He was used to it. Fixing things had always been a solitary job, but this felt different. There was an energy in the room. Something unspoken between them. An hour passed, and Jack was deep into the bike's engine, his hands greasy and his face focused. He wasn't thinking about much, other than the task at hand. He had the bike nearly fixed when the girl spoke again. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "I don't know how to repay you." Jack didn't look up. "It's no trouble. It's what I do." "I don't have money," she said, a bit sheepish. Jack finally paused and looked at her. "I don't need money. I just need to fix things. He wiped his hands on a rag again and gave her a smile. That's all. She stared at him for a long moment, almost like she was studying him, trying to understand something. Finally, she stood up and walked over to where Jack was working. In her hand, she held a small, shiny pendant, its surface gleaming like it was made from some kind of precious metal. This is for you, she said, holding it out to him. Jack hesitated for a second before reaching out and taking the pendant. It was smooth, cool to the touch, and surprisingly heavy for something so small. He turned it over in his hands, inspecting it. The pendant was shaped like a circle, with intricate designs etched along its surface. Some of the symbols seemed familiar, while others were unlike anything Jack had ever seen. There was something about it, something that felt ancient. You don't have to give me anything, Jack said, feeling uncomfortable with the gesture. I'm just doing my job. The girl shook her head. This is important. It's more than just payment. It's a gift. Jack wasn't sure what to make of it, but he didn't argue. He slipped the pendant into his pocket and finished fixing the bike. Once he was done, he stepped back and looked at it. The bike was glowing softly, the energy coils now humming with life. It's ready, Jack said. The girl smiled, but there was a sadness behind her eyes, something Jack couldn't quite place. Thank you, she said, her voice almost breaking. You've saved me. Before Jack could ask what she meant, the girl quickly mounted the bike, starting it up with a soft hum. She looked back at him one last time before zooming out of the shop and into the rainy streets, disappearing into the mist. Jack stood there, staring after her, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction mixed with confusion. Who was she? What was that pendant? And why had she come to him, of all people? He didn't know the answers, but he had a feeling, an undeniable feeling that his life was about to change forever. The rain continued to pour down outside, drumming against the windows of Jack's shop as the hours ticked by. The quiet hum of his workbench was the only sound in the room, aside from the occasional creak of the building settling. Jack sat back on his stool, wiping his hands on a rag, his thoughts a jumbled mess. He hadn't expected the girl to leave so quickly, and certainly not with that strange, glowing bike of hers. His mind wandered to her mysterious eyes, the shimmering purple skin, and that odd pendant she had left him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about her wasn't just normal. She had said the bike was important. But important for what? And why had she chosen his shop of all places to fix it? He sighed and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Maybe he was overthinking it. After all, she was just a customer, right? A customer who'd left without paying. But that wasn't unusual. It was the way things went in his line of work. People came in with nothing, but they always found a way to make it up. But the feeling didn't go away. It was late, and Jack was just about to close the shop for the night when he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. He turned his head, thinking it was just some late-night wanderer, or perhaps one of the neighbors passing by. But when the door creaked open, it wasn't anyone he was expecting. A group of men walked in, tall and broad, dressed in black suits that looked too clean for a rainy night. They wore sunglasses despite the dark hour, and their expressions were unreadable. Jack stood up immediately, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. He wasn't used to visitors like these. Something about them screamed danger. One of them, the leader perhaps, stepped forward. He was older, his face lined with scars, and he had an air of authority about him that made Jack uncomfortable. Is this the shop of Jack Rios? The man asked, his voice low but steady. Jack wiped his hands on his pants, trying to hide his unease. Yeah, that's me. What can I do for you? The man's eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses. We're looking for a girl. She was here earlier today. Purple skin, glowing eyes, a bike that can hover. You've seen her? Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had a feeling this was coming. Lyra, the girl who had walked into his shop out of nowhere. He didn't know why she'd come here or who these men were, but there was a weight to their presence that made him uneasy. I don't know what you're talking about, Jack said, trying to play it cool. You got the wrong place. The leader didn't seem convinced. He looked over at his companions, who began to spread out across the room, inspecting the various tools and machines. They weren't being subtle. It was clear they were searching for something. I think you do, the man said, his voice becoming colder. We know she came here. She's important, and we need to find her. If you know where she went, you'll tell us. No questions. Jack swallowed hard. He could feel the tension rising in the room. These guys weren't here for a casual chat. He had a bad feeling about where this was heading. I don't know where she went, Jack said again, trying to sound more confident than he felt. She left. I fixed her bike, and she left. The leader stepped closer, his gaze piercing. You're lying. The air in the shop seemed to grow heavier, thick with the promise of something dangerous. Jack's mind raced. He had to figure out how to get out of this without escalating things. He wasn't a fighter, he was just a mechanic, but he couldn't let these men hurt anyone, especially not the girl who had walked into his life with no warning. I'm not lying, Jack said, his voice steady now. She's gone. You're wasting your time. For a moment, the leader simply stared at him, the tension building between them like a storm about to break. Jack's mind was running in circles. He needed to think fast. He needed a way to get rid of them, to protect himself and the girl. The leader finally turned to his men and nodded. It was a subtle motion, but Jack could feel the change in the air. The men began to close in around him, their movements deliberate. They were either going to find something in his shop, or Jack didn't want to think about the alternative. Just as one of the men reached into his jacket, there was a loud crash from outside the shop. Jack's heart leaped into his throat. The door slammed open, and in the blink of an eye, a bright blue flash lit up the room. The sound of electricity humming and buzzing filled the air. It was the girl, Lyra. She was back. Her glowing eyes were fixed on the men as she stepped through the doorway, her body poised and ready. The energy around her seemed to vibrate with intensity, and for a moment, Jack thought he saw a flicker of light in her hands. It was like she was about to do something dangerous, but then she stopped. Leave. Now. Lyra's voice was cold, her tone final. The leader took a step back, his eyes scanning the room. His men didn't move. They seemed just as cautious as he was. But Jack saw it. He saw the hesitation in their eyes. They weren't expecting her. They weren't ready for whatever she could do. The leader's jaw tightened. You're in the wrong place, girl. You don't know who you're dealing with. Lyra's eyes flashed brighter, and Jack could feel the power radiating off of her. It wasn't just her energy. It was something more. It was as if she were drawing from something deep within herself, something ancient and powerful. Jack had never seen anything like it. Last warning, Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it carried with it a weight that made the room go silent. For a moment, the men stood still, weighing their options. Jack could see the doubt in their eyes now. They didn't know what Lyra was capable of, and it was clear they didn't want to find out. Without another word, the leader turned on his heel and motioned for his men to follow. Let's go, he muttered, his voice tense with frustration. The group filed out of the shop, the door slamming shut behind them with a heavy thud. Jack stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. What had just happened? What had Lyra done? And who were those men? Lyra stepped forward, her eyes softening as she turned toward Jack. Are you all right? Jack nodded, still in shock. I think so. What was that? Who were they? Lyra hesitated for a moment before answering. They were after me. They work for my father. He's someone dangerous. Jack's mind raced. This was bigger than he had imagined. She wasn't just an ordinary girl. She wasn't even from Earth. And now, he was caught in the middle of something he couldn't even begin to understand. Your father? Jack asked, his voice trembling slightly. Lyra nodded. He's a warlord. He rules over several planets, and he doesn't take kindly to anyone who tries to leave him. I'm a fugitive now. And I brought the danger to your door. Jack's mind spun. He had never asked for any of this. He was just a mechanic. He wasn't supposed to be caught up in a galactic war. He wasn't supposed to be helping an alien fugitive. Yet here he was, standing in his tiny shop, trying to make sense of a situation that felt too big for him to handle. You shouldn't have come here, Jack said quietly, more to himself than to Lyra. I had no choice, she replied. I didn't know where else to go. Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm in his chest. He had just survived his first encounter with the kind of danger he never thought would be part of his life. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. His life was never going to be the same again. And somehow, he was going to have to figure out what came next. The days that followed were strange for Jack. Every morning, he opened his shop with the same old routine, wiping down counters, organizing tools, and hoping that someone would come in for a bike repair. But now, with Lyra in the picture, nothing seemed ordinary. She stayed with him, hiding out in his cramped apartment above the shop, and though she never explained much about who she was or where she came from, Jack could tell she was carrying a heavy burden. She didn't talk about her father often. But when she did, it was with a bitterness that made Jack feel the weight of her words. Lyra wasn't just running from a powerful man, she was running from the life she had been born into. A life of control, fear, and violence. Her father, a warlord with control over entire star systems, was the kind of person who didn't tolerate defiance. She had defied him, and now, she was paying the price. Jack didn't know how he had gotten dragged into this. He was just a mechanic, a guy who liked to tinker with things and fix what was broken. But now, his shop had become something else entirely. A hiding place, a meeting point, a place of refuge, though Jack knew it wouldn't be safe for long. It wasn't long before Jack began to feel the pressure. The men who had visited his shop that night weren't the only ones looking for Lyra. Rumors spread fast in a city like this, and Jack knew that the people looking for her weren't just men in suits. There were more dangerous forces at play, things Jack couldn't even begin to understand. But one thing he did know for sure was that Lyra couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, her past would catch up to her, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Still, he didn't regret helping her. Every day, as he fixed bikes and worked on the machines, he saw Lyra watching him from the corner, studying him with those glowing eyes. She seemed to be lost in thought most of the time, but whenever Jack would glance over at her, she'd offer him a small, grateful smile. Jack was starting to feel protective of her, even though he barely knew her. Something about her quiet strength, the way she carried herself despite the danger that was always lurking nearby, made Jack want to keep her safe. But he also knew that he couldn't shield her forever. Sooner or later, the warlord's men would come, and this time, they wouldn't leave without taking her. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Jack was working on a broken hoverboard when he heard a noise outside, a loud, mechanical rumble that shook the walls of his shop. It wasn't like any vehicle he had ever heard before. The noise grew louder, closer. Panic surged in Jack's chest as he rushed to the door and peeked outside. A massive craft hovered above the street, its engines humming with power. It was a sleek, black ship, far too advanced for anything Earth had ever built. It had a menacing look to it, sharp angles, dark windows, and a body that seemed to shimmer with metallic light. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary spacecraft. It was something far more dangerous. Without thinking, he rushed back into the shop and grabbed his jacket, his pulse racing. He needed to warn Lyra, but when he turned the corner, he found her standing there, staring out the window, her back to him. Her expression was unreadable, but Jack could feel the tension in her body. "They've found us," she said, her voice steady but full of quiet dread. "It's them, the soldiers. They've come for me." Jack's heart sank. He had been dreading this moment, but now that it was here, he didn't know what to do. He couldn't fight off an army of alien soldiers. He was just a mechanic, but one thing was clear: Lyra couldn't face them alone. "Lyra, we need to go," Jack said, his voice urgent. "We can't stay here. They'll tear this place apart." Lyra turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a calmness that surprised him. "It's too late for that," she said softly. "They're already here." Jack's mind raced. There had to be something he could do. There had to be some way to protect her. His eyes scanned the room, his gaze falling on the workbench where he had been fixing a bike earlier. The tools, the machines, maybe, just maybe. There was something here he could use to fight back. Suddenly, an idea hit him. He wasn't a soldier, but he was a mechanic. He knew machines better than anyone. Maybe he could make something that could help. He rushed to the workbench, grabbing tools and parts as quickly as he could. Lyra watched him, saying nothing, but her eyes followed his every move. Jack didn't know if what he was planning would work, but he had to try. The sound of boots pounding on the street outside made him work faster. He needed more time. He needed just a few more minutes. "Jack," Lyra said, her voice breaking through his concentration. "You don't have to do this. It's too dangerous. I can face them alone." Jack didn't look up. "You're not facing them alone. Not while I'm here." He quickly assembled a crude device from the parts on his workbench, something that might give them an edge, even if it was only temporary. It wasn't much, just a simple stun gun modified with a few extra components. But it could work. At least long enough for them to escape. Just as he finished, there was a loud bang from the door. The heavy, metallic thud of someone pounding on it echoed through the shop. Jack's heart stopped. They were here. "Lyra," Jack said, his voice low but urgent. "We need to move. Now." She nodded, her face tense with the reality of the situation. But there was a fire in her eyes, something that told Jack she wasn't giving up. Not without a fight. Before Jack could say another word, the door was kicked open with a violent force. Two of the soldiers stepped into the shop, their weapons drawn and aimed directly at Lyra. They didn't seem surprised to see Jack, but their eyes were cold and calculating. They were here for one reason, and one reason only: to take Lyra back. "I told you to leave," Lyra said, her voice steady, though there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. One of the soldiers, a tall figure with sharp, angular features, stepped forward. "You don't have a choice, girl. Come with us, and maybe we'll make it painless." But Jack wasn't about to let that happen. He stepped forward, his hand gripping the stun gun he had just built. With a quick motion, he aimed the weapon at the soldier closest to him and fired. The soldier was hit square in the chest. And for a brief moment, his body froze. The stun gun worked just as Jack had hoped. The soldier fell to the ground, unconscious. The other soldier didn't hesitate. He aimed his weapon at Jack, but before he could fire, Lyra moved. In an instant, she was on him, her eyes flashing with a power that Jack could barely comprehend. The soldier was thrown back by an invisible force, slamming into the wall with a loud crash. Jack stood there, stunned, as the soldier crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Lyra turned to him, her breathing heavy. "That was impressive," she said, a small, appreciative smile crossing her lips. Jack, still trying to catch his breath, looked at her, wide-eyed. I didn't know I could do that." Lyra gave him a soft, reassuring look. "You're stronger than you think, Jack." The sound of more soldiers approaching filled the air, and Jack knew they didn't have much time. The escape plan had to happen now. They had to get out before they were overwhelmed. But for the first time since all of this started, Jack felt a sense of determination. They had a chance, and he was going to fight for it. The noise outside was deafening now. Jack could hear the heavy boots of more soldiers marching through the streets, their voices shouting commands as they searched for Lyra. It was clear that they were closing in. They were looking for her, and they wouldn't stop until they found her. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed the few things he could carry. He had to move fast. Lyra stood by the door, her eyes fixed on the darkening sky outside, where the warlords' ships were circling overhead. Their metallic hum vibrated in the air, sending shivers down Jack's spine. These were no ordinary soldiers. These were elite, highly trained warriors, ones that didn't hesitate to crush anything in their path. "We don't have much time," Jack said, his voice low. "How do we get out of here?" Lyra turned to him, her face calm but serious. "There's a hidden way out. It's an old sewer tunnel beneath the shop. It leads to the river. If we can reach it, we can escape." Jack felt a surge of relief. A way out. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "Lead the way." Lyra nodded and moved quickly to the back of the shop, where a metal trapdoor was hidden beneath a pile of scrap metal. She moved with purpose, like she had done this before. Jack followed her closely, keeping an eye on the front door, expecting it to burst open any moment. With a few quick motions, Lyra lifted the trapdoor, revealing a steep staircase that led down into darkness. She motioned for Jack to go first, and he hesitated for a split second before stepping down into the tunnel. The air was damp, and the smell of old water and decay filled his nostrils. It was nothing like the air in the shop above, but it was a welcome change from the tension in the streets. Lyra followed him, and as she closed the trapdoor behind them, the world above seemed to disappear. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their footsteps echoing through the tunnel. Jack's mind raced with thoughts of what might happen next. Were they really going to escape? Or was this just a temporary hiding spot? A momentary break before the warlord's men found them again. They walked in silence, the only light coming from the faint glow of Lyra's eyes. She didn't need a flashlight. Her presence seemed to light up the dark tunnel in ways that Jack couldn't explain. It was as if she carried the light with her wherever she went. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the end of the tunnel. The sounds of the city were distant now, muffled by the thick walls of the sewer. Ahead of them was a large grate, which led out to the river. Lyra moved toward it, her steps sure and fast. Jack followed closely, but as they reached the grate, Lyra stopped. "This is it," she said. "We'll be safe once we get through." Jack nodded, his heart racing. The grate was locked, but Lyra didn't hesitate. She raised her hand, and Jack watched in awe as her eyes glowed brighter. With a flick of her wrist, the lock on the grate clicked open, and the metal bars slid to the side effortlessly. "Let's go," she said, stepping through the opening. Jack followed, and they climbed out of the tunnel, emerging onto the riverbank. The cold air hit Jack's face, but it was a welcome feeling. The sounds of the city were still far away, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jack allowed himself to relax, if only for a moment. But that moment didn't last long. From behind them, Jack heard the unmistakable sound of engines. The warlord's ships were getting closer. Lyra's face tightened, and she grabbed Jack's arm, pulling him toward the water. The river flowed fast, the water dark and choppy. There was no time to waste. "We need to cross," Lyra said, her voice sharp. Jack's mind raced. The river was wide and fast-moving. There was no way they could swim across with the warlord's soldiers on their heels. But before he could voice his concerns, Lyra raised her hand once more. Her eyes glowed brighter, and the water around them began to ripple. To Jack's amazement, the river parted, creating a narrow path through the water, just wide enough for them to walk. Lyra stepped forward, her movements graceful and confident. Jack followed closely, still trying to process everything that was happening. Was this real? Was she really doing this? It was like something out of a story, a fantasy. But it was happening right in front of him. The path through the water didn't last long. As they neared the other side, Jack could hear the warlord's ships closing in. He could see the dark figures of soldiers moving along the riverbank, their weapons raised. "We're almost there," Lyra said, her voice strained with urgency. But as they neared the shore, a loud, booming voice echoed from the trees behind them. "Stop right there, Lyra." Jack turned around to see a figure standing at the edge of the river. The warlord's top general, a hulking figure in black armor, stood with a weapon in hand, his gaze fixed on Lyra. "You can't escape," the general said, his voice cold and commanding. "Your father's not going to let you get away. This ends now." Jack felt a surge of anger rise in him. This was it. The moment that had been building up for days, the moment where they either escaped or were caught. He glanced at Lyra, who seemed unfazed by the general's threats. Her eyes glowed brighter, and Jack could feel the power building inside her again. But this time, it was different. "I'm not going back," Lyra said, her voice steady. "And neither are you." With a flick of her hand, the general was thrown back by an invisible force, landing hard against a tree. The soldiers around him froze, their weapons still raised but unsure of what to do next. Lyra's power was undeniable. She was stronger than Jack had realized. "Go!" she shouted to Jack, her voice breaking through the tension. "Get to the shore, now!" Without thinking, Jack ran, his legs pushing him forward. The soldiers hesitated for just a moment. But it was enough. Jack reached the shore and turned around to see Lyra standing tall, her eyes fixed on the general and his men. The general struggled to stand, glaring at her with fury in his eyes. "You can't run forever, Lyra," he shouted. "Your father will find you." "I'll face him on my own terms," Lyra said, her voice calm but firm. "Not on his." And with that, she turned and ran toward Jack, her footsteps light and quick. The warlord's soldiers began to regroup, but it was too late. Lyra and Jack had already crossed the river and were disappearing into the trees. Jack didn't look back. He couldn't. But as they ran, he felt a sense of hope. They had escaped. For now. And Lyra, the girl he had only met a few days ago, was no longer just a fugitive. She was a force to be reckoned with. The journey ahead would be dangerous, and they didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, since all of this started, Jack believed in something greater. He believed in Lyra, and he believed that together, they might just have a chance to change the galaxy. As they disappeared into the forest, Jack knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning.